Hello everyone, and welcome to another exciting Tuesday night Eventide patrons only stream. How is everyone doing here this fine Tuesday night? I'm doing relatively well. It's been a good week. I've been mostly trying to get caught up on the myriad of tasks. It's funny, after a long period of moving and freelance writing and stuff, you just end up with a buildup of a million things that need to get done. And I'm knocking those things down and getting them off my list here as quickly as possible. So I've been busy. But I am excited now that we are in an era where the Monster Core for the Pathfinder Remaster is fully out. We can kind of talk about some of the things that are in it. Not that there's a lot there that we have to analyze fully, but we did last week kind of use elements of Monster Core as we were kind of doing some of the remastering of part 1 of Wyrmbone's Fate. That work is still proceeding. I'm actually nearly done. But I've still got to do some last checks and some like format passes and stuff like that. But all in all, that's getting really close, and I'm hoping to be able to release it. Anyone who bought the PDF of Wyrmbone's Fate will get the orc version for free. I'm not going to make it separate. As a matter of fact, I'll probably just sell them both in one bundle. You get the original version and you get the orc version. In the future, they'll probably just be the orc version because I don't want to have to present two versions. But content-wise, it really shouldn't matter much either way. So this week, what I wanted to do was spend some time chatting with all of you about, frankly, one of the more interesting parts of Monster Core, and that is the dragon. So, the dragons from Pathfinder, obviously, were pretty tied to the dragons from the SRD, from 3.5. The fact that they have a scheme that is basically color-based, and some are evil and some are good based on their color, was a thing that, we identified pretty early on that we needed to move away from. So as a result, those are no longer really available. Now, like the green dragon kind of is in there as a forest dragon, or rather was translated into that. It's now a different kind of creature, but we kind of kept the look, which was ours anyway. By ours, I meant Paizo. But for me, that presents some different kinds of challenges, because dragons are already a rare thing in Eventide. And the ones that I did have mentioned in Wyrmbone's Fate were chromatic. There was a red dragon and a black dragon. Well, that's no longer going to be the case. So the first thing I thought I'd do is take a look at, if you got your GM Core handy. Oop. Not GM Core. Don't grab GM Core. Don't listen to me. Grab Monster Core. There we are. And we're going to go ahead and I'm going to turn to the dragon entry. Come here, you. There they are. They're hard to miss because they take up a large swath of the book. They start on page 108 of this, and you've got an adamantine dragon. You've got a conspirator dragon. You've got Diabolic Dragon. You've got Imperial Dragon. Fortune Dragon. Horned Dragon. And the Mirage Dragon. And the Omen Dragon. And then you got some other dragon-related creatures. So, we've got, 8 dragons in here. Now, the interesting thing about these dragons, if you haven't dug into the way dragons work in the Monster Core, I've been thinking about this for a while, obviously. Dragons now have a strong affinity to a tradition of magic. So this was a thing that the team and I workshopped back last year when we had to figure out what to do with some of these things, and I think pitched it. But the idea of dragons are now based on tradition instead of color or other like odd family groupings, but as a base thing that they were based on tradition. Now that happens to work out rather fortuitously for us in Eventide. So I'm keeping notes for myself here, by the way, because honestly, I've given some. Let me tell you where I'm at on my process for this before we go any further. So when for something like this, it's something that I've been cooking in the back of my head for a while. I've been thinking about it on and off. I'll kind of noodle with it for a bit, then I'll just kind of put it on a shelf and come back to it later. I find that for me personally, that's the best way for me to iterate on an idea. It takes me a little bit, but I got to kind of throw it in the rock tumbler and let it kind of tumble around in there. And if I don't quite like what it is, I'll think about it on and off for a few weeks and kind of try and refine it and view it from different angles, come at it with fresh takes. Maybe come at it when I'm in a different kind of headspace and see if that helps me crack the code. So this is something I've been toying around with for like a year, but I haven't really written anything down about it. There's no document. So what I'm doing right now is I'm going to chat through my thought process with all of you, because sometimes speaking it out loud and actually talking about it will unlock it in a different way for me. There is something conversational about that process that helps me move along, and as a result, I'm just going to take some notes. So if you hear me typing, that's what's going on. FYI. Okay, so dragons in Monster Core. Back to that. They're based on tradition, right? So in this book, you got 2 dragons of each tradition. And go back to 108. The Adamantine dragon is primal. The Conspirator dragon is occult. The Diabolic dragon is divine. The Imperial dragon is divine. Fortune dragon is arcane. Horned dragon is primal. Mirage dragon is arcane. And the Omen dragon is occult. So that's what we got so far. So Adamantine and Horned. Is Horned, right? Should just leave the book open. Should have the PDF open. That's what I should be doing. Yeah, Horned. Our primal. Mirage. By the way, I love the end papers on this. By the way, if you haven't taken a time to just take a gander, the end papers are great. I love the fact that we're able to do that kind of stuff now. Great. Really cool. So, Fortune and Mirage are arcane. Diabolic and Imperial, divine, and Conspirator and Omen are up. Okay. So, Adamantine, most of these dragons are brand new. The Horned is just is an updated. We took the look of the green dragon and turned it into the Horned dragon. It has some different abilities and does some different things, but it's kind of an analog. So, thinking about it, right, the traditions of magic are really important to Eventide, right? That is kind of a core conceit of the setting. So, making dragons tied to the traditions actually strengthens what they were in Eventide, which before, they were just kind of mostly gone. I think I'm going to retcon that to some extent. Not to say that they're going to be everywhere now. Far from it. But instead of taking kind of a more neutral approach of just like, well, the dragons are mostly gone, they just kind of died out. Maybe that's not the case. So let's take them one by one. Obviously, we're going to start with primal. So primal dragons draw their magic from the primal tradition. And as a result, they're mostly gone. They died out. I think that's the only answer for them in this situation. Primal magic is gone. Dragons are tied to primal magic. If there are any left, they are in hiding in some of the few places where there might still be primal magic, which I haven't even described any yet in the setting. So, and that's assuming that there even are any. So, I think the answer there is pretty simple. Now, I think one of the things that's tricky with that is that I have a sneaking suspicion a lot of the kind of extant dragons, many of them are probably going to end up being primal. So that may just mean that I don't get to play with them, which is fine by me, right? I think you might find that we do dragons that are tied to terrains or things like that. I don't really know. I'm not actually giving you any spoiler here. But those dragons probably are just gone from the setting. So any dragon that ends up with that tag is just not present. Then we get to Arcane and Divine, and this is where things get kind of interesting. So Arcane and Divine are probably, if I'm thinking about it, fading away. Just like the magic that they're tied to. And are either fighting over sources of power or slumbering in places where that power is still strong. So the way I see it so arcane and divine magic are both kind of fading in different ways. Divine magic is weird because, as we've discussed before, the gods have started to go silent. And there's some sort of disconnect to kind of the planes. So yeah, there's a bit of a disconnect to the planes themselves. You can't summon creatures. You sometimes bringing people back from the dead maybe doesn't work quite as well, or doesn't work at all. So there are elements like that going on. So divine dragons would have their kind of connection to their source severed intermittently in ways that causes them some struggles. Arcane magic is just kind of fading and withering, right? There's just kind of a disconnect in its power. Now, I think one thing that's important to note here is, for story purpose, the dragon that attacks Wulfrun's tower has to be. That's an important part of it. So, I'm going to make a note to myself here. Because I realized last time in the notes I put down mountain dragon. And I'm like, well, that's probably a primal dragon. That probably doesn't. And even if it did exist during Wulfrun's time, it probably wouldn't have gone after Wulfrun's tower. Because part of that story there is the dragon is trying to get at Wulfrun's magic. Spoiler. And it's not like it's that big of a secret. It's pretty obvious to figure that out, that the dragon is trying to get at Wulfrun's magic. But for that story to play out the right way, it has to be an arcane dragon. So I'm going to have to change whatever that is. Now, could it have been a fortune dragon or a mirage dragon? Maybe, but I probably want to come up with something different. So we'll talk about that here in a minute. But I'm going to put that out there as a note. And then finally we have occult dragons, which are likely flourishing in this era. Occult magic is the one that hasn't really been affected, so their dragons would still be a-okay, and as a result, they may even be growing in power. Because their competitors are no longer present. Now, I see in chat here the Penumbral Dragon comment. Yeah, I mean, you know, having some sort of Shadow Dragon or something makes a lot of sense. I think that falls into the realm of very low-hanging fruit. The Conspirator Dragon is really interesting because I think that is a dragon that definitely plays into some of the themes and stories of Eventide Hell. Hey, lights on. Weird back on that side. Okay. So there's that. Okay, so with what we have going on in the world, obviously shadows and shadow magic is a thing in this setting. It's obviously a thing that's growing in power, and as a result, that is a very likely direction to go. Now, as far as other, you know, arcane or divine dragons, you know, I certainly think there's some interesting things that we could play around with in that front. But I don't know that any of it, like, I don't know that, you know, just being like, well, it, you know, it was a fortune dragon that wanted at Wolf Power. But maybe the answer here is instead to create a different kind of arcane dragon that's interested in Conspirator Dragons did it. Yeah. I mean, yeah, sure. We'll blame them. They get blamed for everything. Where are they? Nowhere. Everywhere. Who knows? So the dragons have kind of themes to them, and obviously some sort of dragon that's concerned with spells and the kind of raw essence of magic, right? There's the Fortune Dragon, which is all about treasure and magic items. Interesting. Not really Wolfrin's thing, so that doesn't really make sense for the dragon to come after Wolfrin for that. Mirage Dragon is all about illusions. Again, not really what Wolfrin was all about. Now, maybe the answer here is something to do with lore or scrolls, or, you know, I don't want to make a scroll dragon. That's a bit too on the nose and a bit odd, right? Because I think these dragons work best as concepts, right? You know, if you think about it, like the Diabolic Dragon versus the Imperial Dragon versus Spiritor and Omen and things like that. Many of them, I think the only ones that get pretty on the nose are the primal ones, and those are the ones that I don't have to worry about. The rest tend to represent concepts. So, you know, I don't want to say Mana Dragon. That's not what I'm thinking of here, but something in that direction. Like, for this arcane dragon that came after some sort of dragon that thirsts, that its obsession is lore or power, just kind of raw magical energy. So I'm thinking about that. I'm gonna write down. I'm gonna put it in quotes because I actually don't. Because Wolfrin's study is on Eventide, but I mean, you know, lore might be the way to go too, and I don't mean, so occult dragons tend to be about secret, right? So, you know, I think that there is an element of like, well, couldn't it have been an occult dragon? And the answer is no. For the story, that doesn't work. But there has to be a version of kind of lore and knowledge that isn't secret, right? That's more about understanding and research, right? So almost like a research dragon. Wears a lab coat? I'm gonna assume he wears a lab coat. That's not quite the right word. Erudite? Just writing down words now. Erudite. archival. Kind of like that. Gonna write that down. I like the idea of a dragon who cares about knowledge, but isn't about keeping it a secret. It wants to know. It wants to learn that information. That feels more arcane. The occult side of it, like, you get into, like, this, you know, the whisper dragon, right? You know? That's the other side, right? There's the side of it that's like, I want to learn this information and hide it from everyone else. And then there's the, I want to learn this information and share it with everyone. They're very different. They're very different aspects of the same kind of trait, which is interesting. So one thing that you may have noticed, if you're paying close attention to the traditions, is the way that they share concepts. Each tradition shares concepts with its neighbor, but not with the tradition opposite it. So occult magic tends to have illusions and mind magic and things that affect spirit. You know, that's what occult magic has, and it shares like spirit and body magic, you know, or spirit and spiritual magic with divine, and it shares illusion and divination magic with arcane. But if you look at Primal doesn't tend to have either of those. Primal will heal body but not spirit. Primal has elemental magic, but occult doesn't. And then if you look at arcane has the elemental stuff that it shares with divine, and it has the mind and divination stuff which it shares with occult. And then when you look at divine, it has the body and spirit stuff. It takes all that together. So when you're looking at them, that's how they work. So it's not weird that arcane and occult would share overlapping interests, right? But they will look at them in different ways. Just like, you know, if you play around with, you know, some of the concepts that you might see in a primal dragon might be shared with a divine dragon, right? You know, they may have similar kind of concepts and themes. Same goes for the spells and the magic, right? So it's not universal, right? There are some things that kind of are more universal concepts that are kind of pick and choose. We don't have hard rules on this sort of stuff. It's more like theme and feel. That's how, you know, we built the world. So saying that there are, you know, there's an arcane dragon that cares about knowledge, there's also an occult dragon that cares about knowledge. They will care about knowledge in very different ways, and that's okay, is what I'm saying. So I think that's the way we have to look at this. So having a dragon that is all about knowledge and learning and understanding makes some amount of sense. Inkhorn. I'm going to write that down. I don't think I'm going to use it, but I'm going to put it in my notes. Being bookish. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Inkhorn. Really? Kind of fascinated by that. But I'm gonna look that up. I want to see the etymology. Huh. Interesting. Pedantic. Yeah. Ostentatiously learned. Interesting. No, it is kind of neat, especially considering it's, you know, a dragon term. There's something kind of fun there. Not sure where I'm going to take that, but I'm interested in it. Well, no, hey, listen, if you're sitting on thesaurus.com, welcome, you are in good company. That is the friend of every game designer I know, who, when they need to come up with an interesting name for a thing, or they're trying to create a clever title or turn of phrase, will be like, I want it to mean Book of Darkness, but that sounds boring. How can I make that sound cool? And, you know, to thesaurus.com, or, you know, one of the other myriad sites. Doesn't have This is not a sponsorship. You can, yeah, that is very, very, very common. There's also some old English dictionaries and things like that. Some of those aren't as useful, because they don't sound like what you want them to sound like. But yeah, so interesting. Okay, so I kind of like the direction that piece of this is taking. That the dragon that has done this. Let's talk about. I've known people who read the dictionary for fun. I get that. I mean, I'm not one of them, but I get why, right? So let's talk a bit about dragon. So we got shadow or whisper dragons or something like that, some sort of a cult dragon. I'm hold on. Let me to brilliant. Well, that's kind of interesting. I like how it conveys light, which also then, like, so some of the interesting things you can do with when designing a creature like this is that you can have a name that is both descriptive of its abilities, but is also kind of it also means something else. I like that because they're very shiny. So interesting. I'm trying to play around with the concept that boy, I'm not sure I can touch on this without giving away too much. So I'm just gonna make a note of myself here. Sorry, folks. There's a secret here that I think I want to keep to myself for just right now. I know you're all patrons, but this is still cooking, so I don't necessarily want to say it unless in case I decide to go in a different direction. Sage is interesting. I'll keep adding that to the list. If folks come up with other interesting names for the kind of scholarly dragon. No, the secret thing I'm talking about is not one of the truths. It's a deeper piece of lore piece that I'm still playing around with. I can't say more than that without giving it away. Yeah, I think interestingly, like, if I look at the dragons that we have, like, especially if I just look at one of the, if I look at the 8 dragons that are in the monster court, Adamantine and Horned are basically gone. Fortune and Mirage, I think Fortune dragons probably still exist, but they're pretty rare. Mirage dragons, there's probably some still around, but are even more rare than Fortune dragons, because at least Fortune dragons can sit on their horde and kind of draw magic from that. The Diabolic and Imperial dragons are going to be very rare these days. As a matter of fact, I think Divine dragons probably suffer more than the Arcane dragons do, just because the nature of the tie to the Divine has become very tenuous. There's still magic flowing, but it's the direct link is kind of sketchy, which is something Divine relies on more than Arcane. And then, of the 2 occult dragons that are in the book, you've got the Conspirator dragon, which I think, boy, there's a lot of stuff I could do with that concept. I'm going to make a note or two here. Conspirator dragon tied to Ankar? Linked to the throne? Maybe? Maybe? And then you've got Omen dragons. who saw all of this coming. I think that's the most interesting thing, is that maybe Omen Dragons don't know why this happened, but they know where it's going. And as a result, many are in hiding or are dead. Huh. I'm gonna look at their lore. I'm going in kind of a direction here, folks. Bear with me. So, Omen Dragons. Fate is a fickle matter in Galarian. Even with prophecy broken in the world, there are ways to look at the immediate future that require a vague sense of long-term events. Omen Dragons are bound to see the future, nebulous though it may be at times. Visions of the future hound them like a quiet song that never stops playing in their minds. When an Omen Dragon can focus or ignore the music... While an Omen Dragon can focus on or ignore the music of fate at any time, the song plays all the same. At a glance, Omen Dragons resemble other occult dragons in appearance, save for the mirror-like interior membrane of their wings. And Omen Dragons' wings offer glimpses into the future. These glimpses are cloudy and vague, but generally correct, if only technically. Omen Dragons have a natural compulsion to share the futures they see. These dragons have no compunctions about what the visions show, and share their knowledge equally with innocent villagers as they do with wicked. High-level abilities include things like prophetic wings, high-level auguries, walk the timeline. Let's see, that allows it to kind of choose different actions. Impending fate. Deals extra damage and stuff. Okay. So here's the thing. I think Omen Dragons are pretty rare in Eventide. And I think they're pretty rare because something is killing them. What that something is, I'm not going to say right now, but I think that's the thing that's happening. I think Omen Dragons know what's going on, know where this is going, and as a result, something is hunting and killing them. I like that. I like that a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. So much. So much I can't even say how much I like that. I like it a lot. All right. I'm going to leave it at that, though. I'm just going to leave that note for myself. I'm going to bold that note. I'm going to bold that piece of that note, because that is absolutely what's happening. Sometimes something clicks. There's a reason why. So here's the thing, folks. I don't... Things are still pretty busy and turbulent here. I haven't had a lot of time. I've started to have more time. But I haven't had a lot of time to just sit down and throw, 4 to 6 hours on some Eventide progress. It's more been like nibbling at it here and there when an idea hits me. But there's a reason why I'm enjoying doing these Tuesday streams, even if this is some of the... it sometimes can seem a little looser than you might think, is because oftentimes it forces me to evaluate a thing by talking about it. And it's not always easy for me to do, but sometimes it allows me to have breakthroughs, and this was one of them. Omen Dragons are being hunted. Yep. Yeah. No, you're right, folks. If you've ever played in a campaign with me, all of my players know to get very worried when I have that expression on my face. When I suddenly go. And they just kind of are like, definitely bad. So yeah, that's really fun. It's a secret. So that's what we've got in there so far. The Adamantine and the Horn I'm not too worried about. Fortune. Yeah, that's what benevolence looks like. It's funny because I you know, the whole benevolence thing came around from Knights of Everflame, as an inside joke between me and the cast, that eventually just made it on camera, and but they learned that pretty quickly, because there would be times where I would be sitting around chatting with some of the producers or the director. Sometimes I would bounce ideas off him for directions we could take it. He wasn't a deep gamer, but he understood enough that he understood storytelling. And we would come up with something, and then I'd be super happy between takes, and the players would get very, very worried, because they knew that when I was really happy, that meant that something terrible was about to happen, or we were about to hit a part of the story that was nightmarish. I cannot tell you how giddy I was before they went into the Underdark in season 1. Because that turned into a mess, into the Darkland. So anyway, same sort of energy right now. That I'm just giddy. I'm happy. So let's talk about the other ones here real quick. Let me just make sure I've got notes on them necessarily. Fortune and Mirage are mostly sleeping. Mirage are through I think Fortune Dragons are mostly sleeping. I think Mirage Dragons are kind of moving in the shadows, moving through society, trying to collect and save what they can of their magic, using their mirages to save them. Symbolic and Imperial Dragons have Diabolical and Imperial Dragons have mostly, I think they mostly either become sullen or enraged. So I think that, so for the Diabolical and Imperial Dragons, right, they have such a tie to the plane that the lack of that tie is messing with, right? Their magic is still flowing, but they can't speak to the beyond. They're no longer agents or patron. Their patrons no longer communicate with them, and as a result, some have started to think that their patrons, their power is dead or gone. Others have gotten, you know, and they've taken that one of two ways. Either they've gotten kind of depressed about it and don't see a point to anything anymore, or they've become kind of enraged by it and abandoned. I'm gonna add that note. Feeling abandoned. So, Conspirator Dragons. Tied to Zankar, linked to the throne. Woven into the Zankar power structure. And then I'm just going to put a note in here, Penumbrous Academy as discovered. A new Shadow Dragon. I'm going to put that in quotes because I'm not sure I'm going to go with Shadow. I think that's perfectly open. As a term for me to use, as a piece for me to use. Because Shadow Dragon's been in like a million different properties. It's not protectable because you can't. That'd be like saying, you know, Bread Dragon. You can't copyright Bread Dragon. Bread Dragon. So I liked a bit about Conspirator Dragons. Okay, I think that kind of sums up the ones that we have here. We also know that there's at least one that we need, but there could be more, right? Doesn't have to be all of them. There's definitely one in my notes here that I'm not going to talk about that I need to develop. Oh, the Imperium would definitely. I mean, so the thing about the Imperium, right, is on the surface they play the whole like we don't need magic in our society. By and large, there's some that's pretty tame and you know is in our control and they use to some effect, but by and large they don't want the gods tinkering with their realms. And they don't want, you know, they don't want wild spellcasters running around causing devastation. So a lot of that stuff is illegal, but that doesn't mean that the government doesn't have it, right? You know, so you know, being like, oh, yeah, you know, we will protect the people from dragons. You know, we've got a few that work for right, you know. That is perfectly within their kind of wheelhouse, right? Huh. Go ahead. Word document. Okay. Yes. Come here. That's perfect. Okay. Well, interesting. Okay, so what have we managed to do here today? Well, we managed to look at the dragons that exist, kind of talked about how they fit into the world. I think a lot of that makes more sense now. To be honest, I'm more excited because I think this is one of the areas that, frankly, they never had a good anchor in the world. They were kind of a central part of the Wyrmbone story, but frankly, that is a pretty narrow part of the story as a whole, and isn't an active thing. So they never really felt fully connected to the world itself, like they were an intricate part of the storytelling of Eventide. They always were kind of a, yeah, that's the thing I need to figure out. There's a handful of things that still live in this place. I still don't feel like I have a good home for a lot of the kind of less common humanoid races, right? So I've got goblins, halflings, you know, elves, dwarves, humans, lomelings. But you get beyond that, and I don't have as many, you know, cat folk, lizard folk, orcs, you know, kobolds. Some of those don't really have fully fleshed out places in this world, and maybe here in the coming weeks we'll start to look at some of those, because I do think that is something I'm going to need to include in the player's guide once I'm looking to fully round that thing out to be a better fit for what Pathfinder 2nd Edition has become. Because I think that's the one area now that the campaign, that the documents that I have, the work that I have, is showing its age. Because it was designed for where the game was a few years ago, and not where it is today or where it's going to be, you know, in a year, just based off what's been announced, right? So I do feel like that's something that I still need to kind of develop and work on. Dragons certainly fit into this category of things that are an important part of the game that I never really had a great home for. Oop. Come here, you. You know, funny enough, I just mentioned, I'm showing this to you just because we just talked about Knights of Everflame. I actually have this sitting right here in my thing. It's just sitting here. I stole that from the set. Anyway, that just sits here. I'm gonna hang it up here at some point in time. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, non sequitur of the day. So I am excited that dragons now have a better place in the world, and that there are some aspects of them that are now actually tied into the story in a way that feels a lot more natural, a lot more productive, and frankly gives me some springboard for some really kind of great ideas. So I'm going to ruminate on some of those and figure out how I'm going to put some of those into some of the documents that I'm working on. But boy, yeah, when you see some of this play out, this will be the spot where I realized what I could do with one or two of these things. So really fun here, folks. I'm just about out of time. I want to thank you for hanging out here tonight. I got another stream starting in about 10 minutes, so I want to make sure I give myself ample time. Last week I ran really tight. So I want to make sure I give myself ample time to get ready for that. So as always, folks, I want to thank you for your continued support here on the Patreon. I am looking forward to getting some of these pieces fully moving again. I'm kind of excited and energized to get parts of this adventure done and the player's guide done. There's part of me that really wants to try and burn hard and make sure that the player's guide is ready for after the drop of Player Core 2. Because I feel like I can't actually drop it now until after that comes out, because there's some parts that I'd have to revise right away. So, yeah, this is a good chat here today, folks. I want to thank you all for hanging out. Thank you for your continued support. It means the world to me. Folks, I will see you all next week. We can talk maybe about some of these other ancestries and where they live. So thanks for hanging out tonight, folks, and we'll see many of you over on Twitch here in just a bit. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.